We have done videos in the past. We've even talked about it. The possibility that when the Tory party becomes desperate and it gets desperate enough, would it do a deal with the devil? And of course, would it do a deal with none other than Nigel Farage and reform? Now, remember, we have seen those two victories and those recent by-elections. There is probably behind the scenes in the Tory party going on this weekend a lot of scrambling. We've heard stories that CCHQ is having more Tories try to leave early and that they are trying to stagger potentially as many by-elections as they can before a potential next general election. So you're probably going to hear maybe a lot more stuff this weekend. I would not be surprised if, just as we saw a couple of just about 2 or 3 weeks ago now, the whole we need to replace Sunak would not surprise me if there was a big push again for that next week in some way, shape, or form, or at least in the near future. But we'll have to see. But of course, if they were to get that desperate, bear in mind, there is a poll recently that came out which showed the Tory party left with 9 seats. 9 seats. Now, oh my word. I think that would be a celebration of epic proportions. I would probably get more drunk than I ever have in my entire life if that type of result came in. But as I've said before, the ultimate one we are going for is at least 100 or less, and that is, I think, very, very possible. 9, we'll see. But if the Tory party did get so desperate, would they go to Nigel Farage? Well, here's the thing. Nigel Farage seems to think so. To a point where he came out and said very clearly that Tory party members would choose him to be their next leader. Ooh, oh boy. Once again, Nigel Farage, do we say nipping, poking, and prodding the Tory party? It's his favorite pastime. Is he serious about this? Would he actually do that? Of course, he'd have to, join the Conservative Party, stand and, win an election. But there you go. We'll have to see what happens. But he seems to be very serious about saying this. And I think he could be right that the Tory party members, if Farage was an option, they might very well choose him. Would he survive? Maybe he's opposition. But the second he actually had contact with real power and actually had to do stuff, that's where Farage would just completely unravel, just as every other single populist has ever done. The second they've had contact with real power, they can't handle it. And that has been proved time and time again. But unfortunately, that does a lot of damage, as, again, case in Poland. But going back to this. So before we do get more into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. Down below, links to my Patreon page, the Buy Me a Coffee link where you can buy me coffee, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club down below. So let's crack on into this, because I think this, again, given the results this weekend and probably the panic in the Tory party in the weekend, going to be turning, once again, a lot of heads. So this comes from the BBC with the title of Tory members would choose me as leader, says Nigel Farage. So Nigel Farage has said the Conservative members would choose him as their leader over Rishi Sunak after Reform UK had its best ever by-election results. Mr. Farage, Reform's honorary president, said that he would, quote, have to eventually end up in the same party as Conservative MPs like Jacob Rees-Mogg. I love that. Oh, eventually I'd have to end up in this party. But no, if he really does want to do this, and a lot of people have been talking about very, very recently the Canada 93. Now, what happened in Canada is that the Conservative Party, um, as we're seeing here, completely collapsed and this new party formed. But at the moment, Reform does not have that regional power base that the I can't remember the other Conservative Party name that it was that came and sort of replaced that particular Conservative Party. But it's not impossible to maybe think that, or at least maybe Reform sort of joins together with the Conservative Party, saying, the schism is over. It's time for us to, come together and join hands. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that could happen. So continues. So Reform scored double-digit vote shares for the first time in both Kingswood and the Wellingsborough by-elections. The Conservatives said that Reform UK want to see Keir Starmer in Downing Street. Speaking to the BBC Breakfast, the Conservative Party chairman, Richard Holden, said their ambition is to block Conservatives winning seats. And oh boy, that was an interesting interview if you saw that. But I don't know if Richard Holden's going to be continuing being the party chairman anymore. If you have had such disasters after disasters after disasters, then there's only so much he can keep his seats, because remember, he's in charge of running the campaigns for the by-elections for the general election. So maybe we see in the next maybe week or so a new Conservative Party chairman. That could be. So Mr. Farage told the BBC Radio 4's World at One. He said, I think if you ask a Tory party member right now, they'd vote for me to be leader and not Rishi Sunak. Despite winning over the majority of Tory MPs, Sunak lost a vote amongst the party members last time he tried, with 58% backing Liz Truss to become leader. Again, that wasn't surprising. We'd followed Conservative Home. Their polling on this had been really right and predicting that this was going to come down to a Truss-Sunak race, and that in that, Truss would win. So they were very, very right on that mark. Mr. Sunak eventually became Prime Minister just 6 weeks later when Truss and Boris Johnson pulled out of the race to replace her. Farage said that the Conservatives were doing badly because of their failure in government, not because of reform. He insisted that there was, quote, zero prospect of repeating the Brexit Party's 2019 deal with the Conservatives, which saw them withdraw candidates in hundreds of Tory seats to help keep Labour out of power. Again, something that does bear repeating. How big an effect the deal that they had with the Brexit Party in 2019, I think, can be debated. But I think there are a lot of people that would say it was quite influential. Other people say, well, it had effect in some seats, but not others. But yeah, it's, again, I think will be something debated for quite some time. But anyway, continues. In his role as GB News presenter, Mr. Farage said it had been a regular sight at Tory events where he had been feted by many right-wingers for his role in delivering Brexit. He began his political journey as a Conservative, but he quit the party in the early 1990s over its then pro-European stance, but there's then spoken about returning to the fold if the party shifts further to the right. He said, maybe after the Tories lose heavily, they'll rethink about what actually they stand for and what we need to do in this country as a centre-right government, he told the BBC. One of the things you have seen very recently is you have seen a lot of people running from the Reform Party saying, oh yeah, those Conservatives, they're not real Conservatives. They're the con-socialists. They're socialists. I am not making that up. That is what Richard Trice has said. It's pretty much what Farage has said. Oh yes, Reform, we're a centre-right party. It could fool me with some of the stuff they've said, but there you go. So anyway, he continued. At some point in time, people like myself and Jacob Rees-Mogg have to be in the same party, whether that's Reform or whether that's the Conservatives or whether that's something new. Logically, that wing of the party and Reform have to be on the same team. So again, alluding to the fact of eventually, there is going to be some sort of maybe joining of hands, maybe a re-welcoming back into the fold of these, reform people, or maybe the Conservative Party splits and that hard right, people like Jacob Rees-Mogg join reform, or maybe Farage and Jacob Rees-Mogg create something new. That's not beyond the realms of possibility, but we'll see. Speaking after the by-elections, the former cabinet minister, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said the Conservatives need to focus on appealing to voters who would turn to reform, saying that there was a lot of common ground between the two parties. But Rees-Mogg did insist his support for Sunak's leadership was solid. Yes, I'm sure he thinks that. Mr. Farage, of course, did receive a hero's welcome from many Conservatives at the party's annual conference in Manchester last year. And on Friday, he said he was committed to backing reform, but would have to, quote, have to see what an active role I would play in the party's general election campaign. Farage has repeatedly said he has no plans to make an eighth attempt to get elected in the House of Commons. I think if the shall we say the political circumstances would change, I think Farage would run again in a heartbeat. He would absolutely run again in a heartbeat. Declaring the by-election reforms as a, quote, coming of age, Farage conceded that his party will not win the general election, but said it could win the next one. Reform won about 13% of the votes in Wellingborough and 10.4% in Kingswood, roughly matching the levels it has been polling nationally. Well, here's the thing. If he goes on and becomes this nationalist populist party, might they do well in a general election? Well, here's the thing. You're still going to be fighting with the Conservatives. So either way, the right-wing vote becomes probably incredibly split at that point. The stronger reform gets, the weaker, and it itself gets undermined by the Conservatives. And remember, there is still no properly proved widespread support for reform or its crazy free market fundamentalist platform that people like Farage would stand on. BBC analysis of the major polling does suggest a very marked increase in the party's support in recent months to an average of at least 10%, nearly double where it stood last year. Until now, Reform has struggled to repeat this in any elections. Reform's pitch to voters is very dissatisfied with both the main parties, but the party's policies, including a far tougher line on immigration and scrapping the government's net zero commitments, are in tune with many of the votes on the right of the Tory party. So, what could happen then in the future? Well, I think it will, of course, as we said, the future Conservative Party civil war. Will the party split? Would you see the right of the Tory party, of the Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Suella Bravermans, the Priti Patels, would you see them split and maybe either join Reform? Do you see them maybe Farage and all those? Do they go and form something new? We don't know, but I'll tell you now, it's going to be interesting. Going to be incredibly interesting to see that happen. But as I've said before, the opportunities for progressives for the next decade, if not potentially more, because I'll tell you now, if they split and they form a new party, well, that is probably at least a decade on, if not more, of really good progressive policies we can get done in the making. Because I've always said it, you are going to get a very progressive majority. And when, we get in, then it's the chance then of we then have to go, we have to campaign, and it's getting those ideas and getting those policies in there because that's what it's going to take. And the thing is, we're in power now. We're not in the opposition, we are in power. And that gives us so many opportunities than it did before. And that is, once again, I will repeat that time and time again. And I feel so justified when people like Andrew Marr, just a couple of weeks ago on the New Statesman, said the exact same thing I have been talking about for months. So yeah, I do feel very justified in my proclaiming of that. So people can call me naive or whatever, but I am very hopeful, and I will always, as I said, be very hopeful in my politics. So as always, um, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.